Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to World at War Comics. My next guest is Mr. Tom Brevoort. He is a Marvel VP of Publishing, executive editor, and the conductor of X. Tom, thank you so much for joining me today. Super excited to talk to you and all the things that you've done and all the things that are about to happen on the X-Men line.
Well, thanks. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Very honored to have you on. So I thought, Tom, for people that don't know your background, it's pretty unique. I mean, you're the longest running employee, if I'm not mistaken, at Marvel. I would love to talk about how that happened. I assume you've been a comic book fan, just reading your Substack for a very long time. Can you kind of tell us where that passion for comics started in your life?
I can. I mean, the reality is the way it happened was I started working at Marvel and didn't get fired, or didn't leave. So yeah, everything else is just sidereal to that. Um, when I was 6 years old, my dad he wasn't quite a chain smoker, but he was a heavy smoker. He'd go through a couple of cartons of cigarettes every week.
Oh, wow.
And so consequently, he had a regular need to stock up, and he would do this by heading over to our local 7-Eleven and picking up smokes on the regular. So one day in the summer, he and I were out somewhere, and we stopped at the 7-Eleven and went to get this stuff. And for some reason on that day, I assume like maybe there had been a spill or something back in the magazine area or whatever. But for some reason, on that day, the comic book spinner rack wasn't sort of more off to the side or in the back like it usually was. It was right up front by the front door, which is a terrible place to put it because it's entirely too easy to grab a book and then book it out the door and hit the bricks and not get caught. So it must have been a temporary thing. I never saw it there again afterwards. But so it was there in the front and it caught my attention and I was looking at it. And I can remember still to this day other books that were on it that day. And my dad saw me looking at it and said, "Hey, do you want a comic?" And being no fool, you want to buy me a thing, I'm gonna let you do it. I made my 20-cent investment, and I went with the safest choice possible, which was an issue of Superman 268, Wild Weekend in Washington, guest starring Batgirl. Um, and I bought that at 6. I could read, but not well. I could read simpler stuff. So the first couple of comics that I got, like my mom had to help with, but within not very long, I could read and follow them myself. Although I had my own proclivities when it came to reading comics. I didn't like captions. I found captions boring, so I wouldn't read them. And then there'd be places where there'd be a story, and I'd be confused by the story. But it would never occur to me, maybe I should read the captions to figure out what's going on here. That would be smart. Not being that smart, I just lived in ignorance for a long time, and it took a long while for me to start getting into the habit of, okay, I'll read the captions. Um, and this was one of the reasons why I was not a Marvel fan for like the first 4, 5, 6 years that I was reading comics. I sampled everything because when you have an opportunity to get comics, you weren't buying them yourself if you were 6 or 7. You were at the mercy of whomever was doing the buying. And so occasionally people would show up and give me, Marvel books off the stands. And I found those not to my tastes. Some of it was literally that. It was the 70s. A lot of the writers were very florid, and that meant page after page after page of captions that I couldn't care less about. More crucially for me, most of those Marvel books were being written at a level that was at least slightly older aimed than I was. Steve Englehart was writing about Watergate in Captain America and so forth, and I had no real understanding of any of that stuff. Plus, they had a tendency to all be continued, which was a pain in my ass because I could never be sure I'd get another one. And they also had a tendency. There was a thing that happened quite often at Marvel in this period where whatever the cover image was, it would be the cliffhanger of the issue. So if on the cover of the comic, Spider-Man was about to be hurled into a volcano by Dr. Octopus, and you'd get this comic and go, "Holy crap! I got to see how he survives the volcano." And then on page 17, Doc would throw him into the volcano. "You will never survive this, web slinger," into the volcano to be continued next time. And I would feel completely ripped off. Like, I want my 20 cents back. I don't want to read this comic. I want to read the next comic where he gets, like, that's the whole point.
Yeah.
So I got burned on Marvel books a couple of times. And so as a young kid, I was very vocal. I don't like Marvel comics. Marvel comics stink. Don't bring me Marvel comics. To the point where years later, when I started reading Marvel books, my dad would regularly needle me about it. And he died in the 80s. He died before I got into the business. But I can only imagine the horror that the last 35 years would have been for me, working at Marvel with him at every opportunity giving me the business for some nonsense that I said when I was 7 years old.
Do you remember the Marvel comic that changed your mind toward the Marvel universe?
Yes, yes. I was always interested in the history of comics, and so we had a local public library, the Sachem Public Library out in Suffolk County, and we were regular. My family were regular library goers, like every Saturday or Sunday morning or whatever. My dad and my mom would truck out there because my dad was a big reader and he'd go through books like a whirlwind, and my mom read a lot of stuff. So we'd go out there all the time, and they would let me take stuff out of the adult sections of the library, even though I was only whatever 6 or 7 or 8, maybe 9 by that point. And so I would borrow books out of the very limited stock of collections on old comics that existed in the 70s, things like All in Color for a Dime and the Comic Book. And I'd been able to get, myself, a couple of books that I owned. Julie Pfeiffer's The Great Comic Book Heroes, which was a collection of Golden Age stories, and Jim Steranko's History of Comics, the first volume of that, which covered, the earliest stuff. But in getting those, they were gifts or they were bought for me for birthdays or holidays or whatever. And in getting those, they each had sections that involved Marvel characters. Like the Great Comic Book Heroes reprinted a Human Torch story and a Captain America story and a Submariner story, and I didn't read those because I didn't like Marvel, and I just went, "Okay, I'm not reading this. This is a waste of my time. I know these are bad. I'm just going to skip them." And I skipped them for months. And the same thing with the Steranko history. That first volume has chapters on like the newspaper strips and the pulps, and then Superman and Batman, but also Captain America and the Timely heroes and all the other like DC heroes and all of the Kid Gang heroes. And I skipped the chapters on Captain America and the other Marvel heroes because, again, I didn't like Marvel comics. I'm not reading that. Never going to happen. But there was some. It was in a later summer. It was some summer day where there was just nothing going on. Nothing at all was happening. We weren't going anywhere. Nobody was around. There was nothing on the tube, nothing. And I broke down and went, I guess I'll read these stories that are in my Great Comic Book Heroes. And I found that I kind of liked the Human Torch story. And I didn't hate the other two. And I read the Steranko chapters as well at that point and went, okay, and now I have some kind of understanding of who Captain America is and the Human Torch and the Submariner and so forth. And so, a couple of days later, my family went to the drugstore. There was a drugstore chain. I've stopped. I don't think it still exists, but I've stopped mentioning it by name just in case, because what I'm going to talk about here is potentially litigious.
Okay.
This drugstore was a regular haunt where my family filled all their prescriptions and such. So we were in there, with some regularity, and they had what in my memory is an enormous wire bin full of comics that was constantly being refreshed, but they were exclusively Marvel books. And I know this because I spent many a trip to that drugstore digging through every last stinking copy of whatever was in it to find the one misplaced issue of Action Comics or Detective Comics that happened to fall in there. but they were like 6 for $1 when I started, and eventually became 5 for $1 once the cover price went up to 25 cents. And so, knowing that this was a big bin of Marvel comics, having now had an interest in the Human Torch and realizing from my travels, that I knew he was part of the Fantastic Four. So we went to the drugstore and I dug through that bin and I pulled out 3 issues of Fantastic Four: 177, 178, 179. Here's why this is litigious. This bin, these comics were almost certainly affidavit returns that should have been destroyed, but instead some shady player at the distributor, marked them destroyed, returned for credit, and then sold them out the back of the truck to the drugstore buyer, which is why they could afford to sell them for 5 for $1 or whatever. So literally all of my early comic purchases that were Marvel, were had an illicit level to it, even though I wasn't aware of it. Anyway, I took these 3 issues home and I read them sprawled out in my living room. I remember that, like my legs dangling under our coffee table. For whatever reason, I was like sprawled out on the floor. And I read these 3 issues of Fantastic Four, and I liked them. I really liked them. I was confused by them because a lot of the storytelling wasn't super clear. Things like I couldn't figure out Mr. Fantastic's name because they would call him Richards, but I don't know if they even really clearly call him Reed across those 3 issues, or maybe they do somewhere, and I couldn't put it all together. I knew Richard as a first name. I had an uncle Richard, and so that confused me. Like, how is he not Richard Reed? Like, what is and like literally on something like the second page of the first issue that I read, there's an editorial note that calls back to Fantastic Four 11, and I was like, I need to know about Fantastic Four 11? How long ago? I'm never going to be able to read Fantastic Four 11. Holy mackerel! But this stuff was all intriguing to me. It was sort of like a puzzle, like a thing I had to put the pieces together on and figure it out. And so that interested me. And so I don't know, a week or so later, we went back to the drugstore for some other thing, maybe to pick up something, or I don't know, general shopping. And I went digging through that bin again, and I came up with 3 consecutive issues of Marvel's Greatest Comics, which was the 70s title it used to reprint earlier Fantastic Four stories. And those were Stan Lee and Jack Kirby stories. And I read those, and that was it. That we were done. I was in. Although even there, I was hesitantly in. I was at that point a DC reader plus Fantastic Four.
Yeah.
And that was all I was interested in. It's all I wanted. But because of the way the Marvel universe is structured, and the way there's a certain amount of cross promotion involved, from there I gradually was forced to branch out into other things. As I started buying Marvel 2-in-1 that would team the thing up with weird characters, and some the Fantastic Four characters would guest star in other books, and I'd buy those books or whatever. And I came across on the stands some week a copy of Invaders that had the original Human Torch, and I was like, this is the one that I wanted. Let me buy that. And so gradually, I came to encompass the whole of the Marvel line in a big way.
Yeah, that's so cool. Now, as you're starting to get a little bit older, was there a thought that, man, I would love to enter into this industry, or was that never part of your thought process? You're just enjoying the stories in comic books.
No, I started making my own comics almost immediately. And I still have a couple that date back to like first grade, second grade.
That's cool.
And they were all, cheap knockoffs of things I was reading. I had an ethos about this, a bunch of rules that I put into place for myself, not coming from anywhere. Like, I understood that you weren't allowed to do the characters that the companies owned. Like, they would come and lock you up or whatever. So I wouldn't do like Superman comics or Flash comics or anything, but I'd create my own characters that were more or less, all the elements of those characters that I liked, but that had different names and different things. And I did this. I wrote and drew my own comics for years and years and years, all the way through my fan days, on and off. Not very well in a lot of cases, but I did it. It wasn't even so much me thinking I will go do this one day, as it was like a thing that I did. It was just there. It was another way of connecting with or expressing this affection for all of these stories and all of these characters.
Yeah. Well, then you get up to a point where you're at college, right? I think you attended the University of Delaware, if I'm not mistaken. And then an opportunity with Marvel did come up. Does that sound about right?
Sort of, yeah. That's the short version.
Okay.
Again, as I got older, I figured that I was going to get into the industry or try to get into the industry in some way. And for the longest time, I figured that was going to be as an artist or as an independent creator. Like my vision for it was, well, I'm going to work some day job and then I'm going to do comics stuff, probably self-published, Dave Sim style on the side. Um, so by the time I, graduated and went to college, I went as an illustration major, and I was in the illustration department at the University of Delaware, like you said. Um, and in the orientation, the first year, like the dean of the college breaks down the 4 years of study, and it basically boils down to, well, the first 2 years are your foundation. You take foundation classes across a wide spectrum. On your third year, you focus and specialize in some kind of a particular aspect of the field, illustration or fine arts or sculpture or whatever. And then in your fourth year, you have to serve an internship somewhere related to your specialty. And he gave a bunch of examples, like we've had people do this and do this and do this. And he said, and we even had one person who interned at Marvel Comics in New York. And I thought to myself, right, that's what I'm going to do in 3 years. Um, so 3 years later, I sent out a whole slew of interest letters to all of the major companies that were on the East Coast, which at that time it included not just Marvel but DC and Comico and a couple of other small, probably some guy's apartment building kind of places that were publishing comics, because I needed to do the internship and I wanted to get in. And Marvel was the only one that responded. So
Did you want to be with Marvel, or did you want to be with DC and Marvel was the only one? Like, what in your heart were you hoping that you would get a letter
I
from?
wasn't I wasn't specific. I literally, it was a shotgun blast. Like I said, I thought I would be an independent creator. Like that was what I would end up being. I never really thought about I'll go on editorial staff at a Marvel or a DC and do that. That wasn't really entirely within my awareness. So I needed the credit. Like I need to do this because I need to get the credit to be able to graduate. And if I don't do this, I'm going to have to do some other slog of a job that I don't want to do, some other internship somewhere. So I was very happy when they wrote back to me and gave me the details, and we set this all up. And so in the summer of '89, I interned at Marvel. I did 5 days a week. I was in every day, all day. And then on the weekends, I would work a fast food job to make enough money to afford to be able to go into Marvel those 5 days a week. I stayed with my grandparents, who still lived in Nassau County at that point. So my overhead was taken care of. I just had to afford the monthly train pass to get back and forth, and to pay for whatever I might have for lunch or whatnot.
Because it
And
was
I did
paid, right? Internship.
unpaid internship. No, no, uh there was always one intern that was a paid intern, that came from Antioch College, which was the alma mater of the Marvel's president Jim Galton. And so there had been some sort of paid internship set up there. And I remember like the one guy who was a paid intern, we gave him a lot of grief over that because he was getting paid and the rest of the interns were not getting paid, and you know, it wasn't his fault, but we didn't like that, and consequently we were kind of jerks about it.
Understandable. And how long was it unpaid before you actually were hired on staff full time?
Well, I had, you know, in the interim, like before being an intern, you know, I had moved more into fandom and more into what these days would be considered anime fandom than comics fandom. I discovered that my family moved from New York to Delaware in 1981, and having done that, I was there now in a more remote development. Like it was in a new area that was just being built up, so there was nothing around, nothing within walking or biking distance of any note, and I couldn't drive yet. So you know, every day after school, after high school or whatever, my early years of high school, I was stuck in that house. And so, you know, I had to find things to engage my interest, and one of those things ended up being the Japanese series Star Blazers. And from that, I kind of connected with back in the day we sort of insensitively called the Japanimation fandom. And I ended up doing a lot of work there. I did fanzines and things, and I did a lot of art and so forth. And so I learned a whole bunch of skills that were very valuable when I came in to be an intern at Marvel. Um, you know, I very quickly, and I sound like you know, such an egotistical jerk as I say this stuff, but you know, it's true, and you can ask the folks that I interned with. I interned across three offices: Bob Budiansky's, Craig Anderson's, and Greg Wright's, and I was, you know, like I think, you know, in my life, I've never been more suited for and overqualified for a position than being an intern at Marvel Comics. I could do anything that they threw at me and more. And as I proved that I could do things, I would get to do more. And it was constantly like almost like a Warner Brothers cartoon where you know they want to get rid of the intern and they say, okay, kid, do this thing. That'll take care of him for a week. Zip, all done, boss. What's next? How can that be? Oh, look at this. This is all done. Oh, okay, you know, do this. You know, I could do, you know, not great, but good enough. I could do paste up. I could do lettering corrections. I could even do art corrections if they were basic enough. Somewhere there's an issue of Avengers Spotlight that has one panel with one drawing from me of the Vision phasing through a wall.
That's
Um,
cool.
you know, and you know, I knew the history, I knew the characters. So on things like working on things like the Marvel Masterworks, I was good, and I helped assemble. There was a four-issue Wolverine saga limited series that was taking all of the events of Wolverine's disparate history and putting them into sequence. Peter Sanderson wrote it, but somebody had to like gather all of the panels and things and get them statted and get them pasted up, and that was me. You know, so I did all of this stuff. So even before the end of my 3 month uh, internship was up, there were people on staff, mostly, you know, Bob and Greg and so forth, saying, we got to get this guy on staff. Like, he's good. We want to keep him. And so, like, I interviewed, you know, at least once before my internship was over for a gig that I didn't get. And then I came back home and spent about 2 months you know, not having it and not working at Marvel and being out and going, this isn't as good. And then, you know, one day, you know, Danny Fingeroth called me up because he needed an assistant. His current assistant was leaving, and I came in to interview. And I interviewed with Danny. This was in like November, and he was like, "Yep, I need you to start like right away." And I thought, well, I'm not done with my with my semester, but I'm not going to pass up the gig. Okay, yeah, okay, I'll do that, sure. And then I went back to visit with the people that I knew from a couple of months earlier, Greg and Evan Skolnick and Bob Budiansky and Dwayne McDuffie and so forth. And Bob, in the course of conversation, said, "Hey, you know, we're going to have an opening coming up in my area too. Would you be interested in that instead?" like, we could let you finish the semester and you wouldn't have to start until like January 1st or the end of December. And I thought, this is somebody I know a lot better than I knew Danny at that point. And that's a definite plus, being able to finish that stuff out. So I said, yeah. And unbeknownst to me, like Bob and Danny, they had gone to college together. They were friendly, but they had a little like rivalry between them. And so Bob like claps his hands together and goes, "Great, let's go tell Danny." And we had to go down there, and I had to say, "Yeah, I'm going to take that job instead, Danny. I'm sorry." Uh, but that was it. So I started at Marvel on December. I remember it as December 28th, but the Marvel records show it as December 27th. So I'm assuming that that's right. Um, the week between Christmas and New Year is the most dead week in the comics year.
Yeah. Now, do you remember? I mean, obviously you remember, but what was the first like title that you worked on? Or was it one title? Was it like a few titles that you were working on being part of the editorial staff?
Well, before I was on staff as an intern, I got my first actual credit, and it was on that last issue of Wolverine Saga. The designer Cindy Emmert felt like, oh, I'd done enough work on this, I should be credited,
Yeah.
and she added the credit into the credits page, really without checking with anybody. And it's not even a credit for anything. It doesn't say like Tom Brevoort this. It just says Tom Brevoort. But it saw print and it's still there. So that's my first actual credit. When I came in, I was, for the first month, I was the assistant editor to Marcus McLaurin, who was the managing editor at that point. In those days, there was one managing editor. These days, we call a position associate editor. It was sort of an interim step between being an assistant, where you just assisted and you were an editor and you had a full line of books that you edited, sort of a training wheels position where you had a couple of things, but not as much, and you were more under the oversight of a more senior editor. So Marcus had come out of Epic. Marcus was really under Carl Potts, but in the reporting structure, he reported to Bob, so he did stuff for Bob as well. And he was working on a lot of Epic related books. So Tomorrow Nights and a Critical Mass, which was God, what the hell was that line of books called? Dr. Zero and Power Line and Shadow Line, I think it was the Shadow Line books, and Seven Block and a bunch of things. And he was designing trade paperbacks and things on the side. So he was working on I think it was a Life of Captain Marvel trade paperback, and that office always had the Masterworks. So we had that and a bunch of things. So those are probably the earliest things that I did stuff on.
Yeah.
And it was a variety of stuff. But within a month, Dwayne left staff. He left to go freelance, and he was Bob's direct assistant. And Bob was like, "Right, you move over here with me." And so from that point on, I worked with Buddha, and we were the special projects office. And that basically meant in those days, we did everything that wasn't a standard regulation Marvel comic. So a lot of licensed comics,
Mm.
a lot of movie adaptations,
Mm.
and everything that was a licensed item. So like if you were doing a Hulk bubble bath, we would be the ones drawing the 3 views or getting the 3 views drawn for that Hulk bubble bath, or board games or toys or tchotchkes, or like everything in the world, a wide variety of stuff. We were also doing press posters. There were four, like we would release 4 posters every quarter, so 16 in a year, and those were big, you typically painted posters. We did eventually we did trading cards, and that ended up eating the department pretty much, because they were so successful, and there became so many of them that a lot of the other stuff started to get handed off to other people, and and became a whole like licensing department unto itself. All the stuff that Marvel's current licensing department does today, Bob and I did ourselves, just the two of us. And I mean, granted, there was a lot less licensing in 1990 than there is today, so it was easier to do, but it was a lot of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, what an amazing experience, though, to have in your portfolio of experience, though, Tom. I mean, especially as we get a little bit later on with Avengers. I don't know if that experience how big of a stepping stone was that for you just to understand the industry in and of itself before you moved on to other things?
Well, I think again, it was all good.
Hmm.
It was nice to have a wide range of experiences to draw on and a wide range of things. Like anything, it was good, it was bad. In that, I didn't necessarily know as much as you might want me to know at certain points, and was still figuring all of this stuff out for years and years and years. I'd argue that potentially I'm still figuring it out a little bit, but yeah, it gave a much broader base to pull from, and a much broader experience in terms of dealing with licensors and licensees and the particulars of that stuff. I remember like my first week in Bob's office, which must have been early in February. Bob had a thing that he swears he didn't do this deliberately, but I saw it happen not just to me, but to the two editors who replaced me after I was out promoted and out. So if it was a coincidence, it was a hell of a coincidence, which was Bob would, your first week, Bob would be in and Bob would work with you for a week, and then the next week he'd be off. And so suddenly it was just you flying the plane by yourself for a week. And I remember doing that and there being some problem with it was a literacy book, Spider-Man Adventures in Reading, and whoever we were working with, had a whole bunch of changes and corrections and things that they wanted, and I didn't even know whether these should be made, let alone exactly how to get them all done.
Yeah.
And I had to figure all that stuff out on the go. Um, it was helpful in that it helped give you the ability to scramble and do that stuff.
Kind of a sink or swim thing that maybe he was doing to folks to see if they could handle it or early on.
Maybe, like I say, he claims it was not a deliberate thing, and I believe him. Like he probably booked that vacation, well in advance, and so that was just where it was, and so forth. But it was funny because after I was at, David Wall was in that office, and the same thing happened, and then the next guy, the same thing happened. So, uh, whether it was just we were all we were all coming in at an inconvenient moment, or whether it was a plan, I couldn't tell you. But I'll take Bob at his word there.
True. Although it does sound like there's still questions today, maybe.
Well, at this point, it doesn't matter either way.
Yeah, yeah. Now, when you were in that role, was it satisfying to you, or did you find yourself like, when I was hired on, this is not what I was expecting that I would be doing, and when can I get back to the more on the editorial side, dealing with some of the actual comic stories?
Not really. I mean,
Okay.
I liked, from pretty much the time I stepped in as an intern,
Mhm.
like I found that editorial work really suited me, and suited my skills and suited my temperament, in a way that maybe just being an artist, and sitting at home in front of a drawing board or a tablet or whatever might not have. I liked the regularity of a 9 to 5 gig. I liked the interactions with other weird ass human beings, who also were into this stuff. Like it was a comfortable sort of fit. So during that period, I was never particularly jonesing to do just comics. And again, once or twice along the road, there were times when a gig opened up, in another office. Like a couple of years later, Danny Fingeroth once again had an opening in his editorial office, the Spider-Man office. At that point, he was editing all the Spidey books, and he said, "Hey, will you come over and do this?" And Bob was convinced. Yep, okay, he's going to go. And he said to me, "Well, look, you're going to go, but in a couple of months, you're working on trading cards and stuff, and I'm hoping to be able to create an editor position in trading cards. So maybe I'll hire you back then if we do that." And so, like I went out to lunch with Danny and we talked about all of this stuff. And then it was the day that I was going to go down. I had to give him my decision. And like literally I stepped into the room, into the office. And between the time that my foot went up and my foot went down, my mind went, no, this is not right. Don't do this. And I went, yeah, I can't. I'm going to stay here. And it shocked everybody a little bit because, this is working on Spider-Man books. Like, this is a big thing, big part of the company and so forth. But I was like, no, I'm comfortable doing what I'm doing. I like all the people I'm working with. I feel like I'm in a good groove. I don't want to funk with this. And as it turned out, Bob, and by extension myself, ended up during the 5 editor-in-chief period, taking over the Spider-Man books with Danny, and so I ended up working on them anyway.
Yeah.
But I did get promoted to editor, consequently under the trading cards, and so I was like a full editor at that point rather than just an associate or managing, whatever it was back then.
That's so cool. So now you're a full editor. You come back and you're working on ASM, correct? After the
No,
what's in
Bob,
between that?
no, Bob was working when we took over the Spider-Man titles. We kept a bunch of the staff that was there. Danny was still there, and his assistants and associates were still. So the whole group was folded together. I was still at that point. We were working on trading cards and finishing that stuff up. And Bob was taking point on the 4 core Spider-Man titles with Danny, and then eventually Danny wasn't happy with the merge and being put under Bob, obviously, because, like I said, they had a bit of a rivalry, and that was an uncomfortable thing for him. So he eventually left staff, and so Bob and his assistant Mark Bernardo handled the 4 core books. I tended to handle all the stuff around the periphery. So I did the New Warriors line of titles: New Warriors, Night Thrasher, Nova. Night Thrasher and Nova were kind of on their last legs then, so they went away, and eventually New Warriors did too. And I did Venom, and I did Green Goblin, and I did a lot of sidereal Spider-Man like projects and limited series, Spider-Man: The Final Adventure, and so forth. So it was I was the and the rest guy. I did Spider Boy for Amalgam. I did basically anything that wasn't. I eventually Untold Tales of Spider-Man. I did Spider-Man: Legacy of Evil. I did everything that was not the core of the books, or I did a lot of stuff. I won't say everything because there were other editors who were also doing whatever Spider-Man Adventures and what have you.
Now, was there a goal in mind of a title that you wanted to get on by that time and you were working toward?
I don't know specifically that. I mean, the Mountain book for me, because it was always the book that was closest to my heart, was Fantastic Four. And it was a couple of years later that by this point Bob Harris was editor in chief, that book had gone over to Heroes Are Born, Jim and Rob, and came back and so forth. And Bobby Chase was editing Fantastic Four, and there was a point where she and Bob Harris wanted to put Carlos Pacheco onto the title to write and draw it, and Carlos said he'd do it, but he wanted me to edit it, and that became a bit of a problem at the time. And I told Bob Harris, like, look, I don't have to edit this. This is not, we can get Carlos into the chair and it'll be fine. I didn't ask him to do this. I didn't, prompt him or anything. It's very nice of him to do it, but I don't want to take anything away from Bobby, and I don't want to foul anything up here. But the next time that book switches editorial offices, if it doesn't come to me, I'm going to start breaking people's fingers. So just understand that's the state of play. And Bobby continued to edit FF with Carlos for a good while. And then when Joe Quesada came in, I told him pretty much exactly the same thing sometime within like his first week. Like, this is all good, but if the day comes when that book shifts from one office to another and I don't get it, bodies are going to start falling. So just be aware of that. Like, it's fine. As long as the status quo is maintained, everything is fine. But if somebody else gets it and it's not me, they're going out a window, or something like that. And so eventually, when Bobby left, the book came to me around 2002, right at the end of Carlos's run.
That's so
Carlos
cool.
and Jeff Loeb.
There was just a sidetrack for a second, Tom. There was an interview with Joe a few weeks ago, and he called you a walking encyclopedia of Marvel. He said, if you ever want to know anything about any character at Marvel, go to Tom. He knows everything. And a lot of times he said he would lean on you for certain things just for continuity and all that other good stuff. So I thought that was like one of the highest things that anybody could say about someone, which is
Well,
pretty impressive.
it's very nice. I'm not as good at it now as I would have been 20 years ago,
Yeah.
simply because there's 20 years more stuff,
Yeah.
and keeping track of all of that stuff is difficult and time consuming.
Yeah.
And my brain is older and it's got a lot more dead brain cells in it now. But I'm still pretty good at it, depending. So let's do we'll do the easy one. We'll do Fantastic Four. Number one's the Mole Man. Two is the Skrulls. Number three is the Miracle Man. Number four is Namor. Number five is Doctor Doom. Number six is Doctor Doom and the Submariner. Number seven is Kurgo, the Master of Planet X. Number eight is the Puppet Master. Number nine is Namor. Number 10 is the Return of Doctor Doom. Number 11 is the Impossible Man and a visit with the Fantastic Four. Number 12, they fight the Hulk. Number 13, they fight the Red Ghost and his super apes on the moon and meet the Watcher. Number 14 is the Submariner and the Puppet Master. Number 15 is the Mad Thinker. Number 16 is Doctor Doom in the micro world. Number 17 is Doctor Doom all grown up. Number 18 is the Super Skrull. Number 19 is Rama Tut Pharaoh from the future. Number 20 is the Molecule Man. Number 21 is the Hate Monger. Number 22 is the Mole Man. Number 23 is Doctor Doom. Number 24 is the Infant Terrible. Number 25 is the Hulk versus the Thing, which is continued into 26, which also includes the Avengers. The Avengers take over. Number 27 is the Submariner again, guest starring Doctor Strange. Number 28 guest stars the X-Men, and they fight the Puppet Master and the Mad Thinker together. Number 29 is the Red Ghost and his super apes on the moon again. The Watcher shows up again. Hi, Watcher. Number 30 is Diablo. Number 31 is the Mole Man and the first appearance of Franklin Storm, Johnny and Sue's dad. Number 32 is the Invincible Man, who is secretly the Super Skrull in disguise. Number 33 is Namor Atuma. Number 34 is Gideon, the super rich Gregory Gideon, the super rich guy who's going to take down the Fantastic Four to win a bet. Number 35 is Diablo again and Dragon Man, an android that he brings to life. And when the FF are out looking for colleges for Johnny. Number 36 is the Frightful Four. First appearance of Medusa. Number 37 is Behold a Distant Star. They go to the Skrull Galaxy to get revenge on the guy that killed Franklin Storm. Number 38 is the Frightful Four again. Number 39 is Doctor Doom when they've lost their powers, guest starring Daredevil, which is continuing into 40, where they force the Thing back, Ben back into being the Thing so they can win. Number 41, 42, and 43 is a three-parter with the Frightful Four, where they brainwash Ben Grimm into becoming a bad guy. And then, we're off into the third annual, which is where Reed and Sue get married.
Wow. Yeah, I would say that you're a walking encyclopedia. I feel, Tom, if we could just record like 1 through 100 and just send it out into the social world, it'll blow up, man. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I can do that again when it comes to like the formative stuff, especially. I
Yeah,
can do that super easily because I really know that stuff forwards and backwards. On the
yeah,
other hand, if you're asking me about issues of some book from, of Daredevil from 10 years ago, I
yeah.
can paint in broad strokes and say, well, Mark Waid wrote it from about here to about here, and Charles Soule wrote it from about here to about here. But, getting down to the specific issues, I can't necessarily tell you that number 14 was Doctor Doom, even though it was.
That's impressive. That is impressive. When he said it, I was like, man, if I could get Tom on, man, I would love to talk to him about this. But that is crazy. That actually it was Mark Millar has his podcast and Joe was
Yeah.
on there, and they were going back and forth about Civil War and everything that you were part of, and they sung high praises. So you might want to go back and listen to it. It was pretty impressive.
Yeah,
But
I've watched that actually. I watched that
yeah, it was
episode
so good. It was
sometime a
so
week
good.
or so ago.
Yeah.
So
Now, can you
very nice of them.
talk about the importance of the editor relationship with the writer? I mean, even the artist, but I mean, that's got to be pretty important, right? As you're bringing in to make sure that the story is moving along the way that it's supposed to, I assume. I think a lot of people look at editor, and I'm not sure they fully understand what encompasses being an editor and the responsibility around the editor and that relationship with the team on that title.
Sure. The way I put it, I do a talk every year with our younger editors. That's sort of a breakdown of here's all the philosophy of Marvel. Here's how we think about the job and what we think it entails and how it should be approached. And then here's a bunch of nuts and bolts about making a comic. The essential difference between the writer and the editor is this. The writer's first loyalty is to the story. They've got a story that they're telling, whatever that story is. Their full focus is on realizing that story in the best way possible. The editor's first loyalty is to the book. And, keeping in mind that, yes, we're going to tell this story and this writer and this artist are going to be doing it this month, but next month it might be a different writer and a different artist, and we might have to tell a different story, and making sure that we're not doing anything along the way that's going to, kneecap the characters or saddle them with problems or things. But beyond that, you're also there both to hire the creators most of the time. If people are working on one of my books, it's because I hired them and put them in place, and I'm supposed to be there to support them and to defend their work from interference, internally, and make sure that they do their best work and can carry forward with that going ahead. And that often, means that I'll throw out in any given day a whole bunch of bad ideas, about a situation. Anytime I read a script and I think that there's a problem, there's a plot problem, there's a story problem, or whatever. I always like to not just point to where I think the problem is, but I like to offer at least some sort of a vector towards a solution. I think if we do this, this will be fixed. But I try to tell everybody as well, I don't really care if you use my solution or not. I'm not so invested in that. What I care about is that we solve the problem. And so, if you get there, if you get to the end of the maze using a different path, that's fine. You like that path better? Great. I don't care. And it's also a fair win if you convince me that what I think is a problem isn't actually a problem, and that's a valid solve as well. Not that that's necessarily easily done, because if I think something's not right, chances are, particularly at this point with so much experience, there's something that's not right there, and it'll take a lot to get me to trust you to go out on that tree limb. But sometimes I will, if it's the right creator and they say the right thing. I'll go, yep, okay, I'll go out there on the tree branch with you. So that's the thing. Also, an aphorism I've been using for decades now, and I've said often enough that I'm sure all the younger editors at Marvel are sick of it. Is creators get the credit, editors get the blame, and that's not a complaint. That's not a railing at the sky or anything. That is a statement of fact. That is what the job entails. That's what it is. And if you can't accept that, if you want to try and write the books kind of from the back seat of the car, you're doing it wrong. And you really should not be doing it at all. And if you're out there always talking about how all the ideas in your comics and all the stories where you're doing and you're the genius behind everything, that's not right either. The creators are the stars. They're the performers. If you think of it like a stage show, they're the people on stage that sing and dance and act and do all of that stuff to entertain the audience. And they're the ones at the end who get to take the bows and take the encores. And the editor is the person behind the stage running the curtains, making sure all the costume changes go off, making sure everybody's on their mark when their cue hits, making sure the show can start on time and end on time, and making sure the next show can start on time, and all of that. And they don't really get to come out and take any bows except occasionally a little bit. And that's the difference. And if you can embrace that philosophy and understand it, the flip side of that is the editor gets to be on staff, which means you have a regular steady paycheck. And I quote Donald Draper a lot. That's what the money is for. You don't get to get the applause because that's what the money is for. Those creators, should and do get all of the accolades for anything that goes right. Anything that goes wrong or goes badly is ultimately on me. And that's the responsibility of it. That's just what it is.
Now, did you learn that right away, or is that something that you've experienced over time and that definition has kind of grown with your experience?
Um, I mean that I didn't always have that line.
Yeah.
I did have, like, when I came into Marvel, at the very end of the 80s and the early 90s, philosophically, the belief on the editorial floor, and this was a belief that I believe was, really came to the fore, before even Tom DeFalco was the editor-in-chief at that time, but I think it really came out of the Jim Shooter days, before his, which was the editor is the person that makes the comic book. And it almost doesn't matter who the writer and artist is. The editor is the one driving the bus, and the editor is the one that's making these things successful and good. And walking in off the street as an intern and as a young editor, I immediately knew that was crap. And I immediately knew that. I mean, and everybody on staff did too, up to a point. Like, that there's a difference between having John Byrne draw your comic and somebody else draw your comic. John is popular, or Jim Lee, or pick your person. These guys are super talented and super popular, and their books are going to sell better, and that has nothing to do with the editor. It has everything to do with the quality of the creators. And so again, like in the 80s, I very much, grew into the mindset of like an indie creator. Reading a lot of Dave Simcerabis and his before he went batshit insane. His philosophies on creator equity and creator rights and so forth. And so I internalized a lot of that stuff just coming in. And so that was, like, I was always a little bit at variance with that, because that was sort of a line of BS that people told themselves, to not give the creators their due and to maintain a certain level of command and control. I mean, in those days, you didn't even feature the creators' names on covers. Marvel was the last company to start putting creators' names on covers of books, and that didn't happen until like 1997 or something. So I never quite bought into that, and really that all kind of went away once Joe came in, because Joe was a creator. He started out as a creator. He ran his own independent company, Event Comics, and even though he was coming into the editor-in-chief job and doing it, as a Marvel employee and so forth, he very much had the ethos of a creator, and had his sympathies were very strongly on the part of freelancers and writers and artists and so forth. And so, yeah, at that point, whatever last lingering bits of that philosophy might have existed kind of evaporated and went away. But I had it to some degree before that. That having been said, I didn't have it to the point where I could necessarily do much of anything about it. But other than, on the books that I worked on, try to live that way, try to work that way. And I fouled that up a bunch of times over the years, for sure.
Yeah.
And I ran into situations where, my beautiful, perfect philosophy did not match the actual reality, and I got screwed a couple of times by people I trusted. But that's experience. That's all stuff that teaches you stuff. And I still, I totally believe in that underlying principle that this is the way it works. This is where the creator sits on the board. This is where the editor sits on the board. This is how this relationship is supposed to work. And the artists as well. Like, when I say the writer, I'm really talking about the writers and the artists. It just ends up getting simplified down to writer because it's easier that way. In terms of the verbiage, but it's not like the artist is a fifth wheel or anything.
Yeah.
The artist is super central to everything, and an equal collaborator with the writer if it happens to be more than one person.
Yeah. Now, in the early 90s, just because of what you were talking about, how much did we get the perspective of Image Comics and how it was started? there's a lot of documentaries you could go on YouTube and watch their perspective. But from the Marvel perspective, did that make a lot of changes, that team who left and started Image? Did that impact Marvel, positive or negative, in any kind of a way, or did they just keep moving the way they always did and keep to their philosophy?
Well, it certainly, I mean, it impacted in that you had a vast exodus of talent,
Yeah.
like, whether you like what they do a lot or not, or like it now versus liking it then, Jim and Rob and Todd and Eric and all of those guys were top creators in the field at the point that they left. And so you'd be kidding yourself to think like that wasn't going to have an impact. On the other hand, materially in terms of making the books, it wasn't sweat as much as you might think it would be. And part of that was as those guys left, most of the key editors were able to find replacements that were, if not as good, were still pretty strong. So whether it's the Adam and Andy Kubert doing X-Men books or Mark Bagley doing Spider-Man or whatever, there wasn't a feeling like these guys left and all these titles went into the toilet.
Right.
It was just, we replaced one part with another part. And so that was very much the philosophy of that time. Like, it doesn't matter. If you can't have Jim Lee, you can have, Andy Kubert and it'll be fine. If you can't have Andy Kubert, you can get the next guy.
Yeah.
And it's X-Men that's selling this as much as anything, right? And whoever's on it, yes, they help it, but it helps them just as much.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Now let's get back to you, Tom. Because we get into kind of the late 90s, if I'm not mistaken, and that's when you are put on Avengers. Is that correct?
Yes, 1997.
1997. Yeah. Can you kind of talk about what that experience was? Because out of your amazing career at Marvel, if I were to Google the impact that Tom has had on Marvel, a lot of articles about Avengers are going to pop up and how that just went to another level, right? Can you kind of talk about that experience, what your idea going into that position was, and did you ever expect it to end up how it did during that time frame?
Well, I'll start with the last thing first. No, of course not. Nobody
Nobody does.
nobody at that point thought, "Oh yeah, he's going to do this for 26 years."
Yeah.
26 years it's not quite the record,
Yeah.
but it's as close to the record as anybody is likely to get, because the only editorial stint that beats it in Marvel Comics history is Stan Lee editing Millie the Model.
Oh, really?
From
Millie the
Yeah,
Model.
Millie the Model from like 1944 to 1972.
Wow.
I think it was maybe 28 years if I'm remembering right. Um, whereas I only managed 26 before bombing out.
Only.
But everybody else, every other editorial run, there's not another one that's as close to it. And if you're just talking about just Avengers, it's not only twice as long as the nearest competitor, it's 3 times as long.
Wow.
So it's an unprecedented span, and one that I'm certainly not gonna equal anywhere else, and that likely nobody else is likely to for a good long while.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it will never happen, but this is a long thing. So
Yeah.
Avengers, I came to because this again was Heroes Return. The books had been licensed out to Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld, Extreme Studios, and Wildstorm Studios to produce for a year, and then they were coming back in house. And I was going to be editing Iron Man. Kurt Busiek was going to write Iron Man, and I hired Sean Chen to draw Iron Man. And so Iron Man was going to be the book that I got coming back. But as a group, the decision was made, and Ralph Macchio, longtime editor, was I think fairly instrumental in this. He stumped very hard for George Perez to do Avengers coming back. And so, Bob Harris and them reached out to George and said, "Hey, Avengers, would you want to do that?" George was kind of his star was sort of had lost some of its luster at this point after a bunch of years where he had a bunch of projects that ended up with him not finishing them completely and them having to be finished by the people, and then doing a lot of work in the indie sphere where they would pay him a lot of money per page to draw stories that he couldn't have cared less about. So he kind of, he still had the reputation of being George Perez, but he was not at his strongest, let us say. It was not his best moment. So he was interested in doing Avengers again, and um, there was a point like a year or so before that, he had written a Spider-Man Avengers team up for me, in an issue of Spider-Man Team Up. Strangely enough, and while we were talking about that, he said, like, I was drawing this book Ultra Force for Malibu, and they were paying me really well, but it was driving me crazy because every time I'd have to draw prototype, I'd want to draw Iron Man, and every time I had to draw Prime, I'd want to draw Thor, and so it wasn't doing it for me, and I got off it, pretty quickly. I was frustrated by it. So him coming back to Avengers was a big deal. Um, he pretty much said, I don't think I can write it because I've been away from the Marvel stuff for so long. I don't really know the continuity anymore. So I'd like to work with either Kurt Busiek or Mark Waid on Avengers. And Bob called Kurt first. I don't know why. He did. He called Kurt, and so Kurt came on, and so now it's going to be Kurt and George are going to do Avengers. And the two of them had a conversation. And in that conversation, they kind of came to the conclusion that I, with my expansive Marvel Universe knowledge, would be a benefit to them on Avengers. And so they approached Bob and said, "Hey, we'd like Tom to edit Avengers." Bob went for it. So Avengers was supposed to go to Bobby Chase, but instead Iron Man moved over to there, and she took over Iron Man from the start, and I inherited Avengers, which was good. George was my favorite superhero comic book artist. He'd drawn those issues of Fantastic Four that I had started out reading, and I'd followed him from assignment to assignment, even iBots. I even read iBots because George was there. Um,
Legend.
and I had worked with Kurt for a couple of years at that point on Night Thrasher and Untold Tales of Spider-Man and launching Thunderbolts and so forth. So he and I had a good working partnership that was very simpatico. So it was a very easy, simple thing to slide into, and we started doing Avengers, and lo and behold, it clicked with the audience, and Avengers was the most popular of the four books that came back. Now, saying that, all four of the Heroes Reborn books, during the time that they were away and the time they came back, were selling way better than they had when they left. So, you can't not point to Jim and Rob and all the people that worked on those books, James Robinson and Scott Lobdell and whomever, and not go, yeah, okay, they did a good job of making people care about this stuff again. But then in terms of the shuffle, like Avengers was not the best-selling book when it was under Heroes Reborn, but with George and with Kurt, it was, and it was a top-selling book all the way through. And George, when he came on, the joke around the industry was great. Who's going to draw issue 2? And George completely showed them up. He did 15 issues in a row without a fill-in. That include 2 double-sized issues. And his whole run was 34 issues in total. And he was there after all of the artists of all of the other launch books had left their books. He did it the longest. So he showed them that he still had juice in the tank and could do this for real, and he became George Perez again.
Yeah. Now, as you're editing and the team is starting to gel and come together, what was the first like storyline that really exploded? Because we got some amazing movies out of that era too, right?
Well, over the course of Avengers, sure.
Yeah.
On the Kurt and George stuff, obviously the first storyline that featured everybody who was an Avenger,
Yeah.
and then turning them all into medieval versions of themselves, was a big hit. Probably the most popular story we did in that run was the Ultron Unlimited story, big Ultron story that people will still like point to today, and it's probably the high point of that run.
Yeah.
And then even after George left and Kurt stayed on another like year and a half, 2 years, we did the Kang Dynasty, where Kang takes over the world, and that was a big story. And then, of course, we did Avengers Forever at the same time that first year with Kurt and Carlos Pacheco, and people remember that very well. And then thereafter, like it passed from creator to creator, person to person. Jeff Johns did some very nice work on it. Chuck Austin was there for the blink of an eye. And then, Brian Bendis came on with Avengers Disassembled, which
Yeah.
was a big thing for a lot of people, and sort of started that cycle of stories that ran from Avengers Disassembled into House of M and into Civil War and World War Hulk and Siege and Secret Invasion and Siege and Heroic Age and AVX and on and on and on and on, all the way to the end of Brian's, 8+ year run on the Avengers titles, New Avengers, when Avengers became New Avengers, and all of that was big. Probably the biggest bit of it all was Civil War. I don't know, like, we did great stuff on all the other sides of it, but probably the most loved over time and the most hated in the moment was Civil War. And it's still it's still like one of the best selling collections that we have. I think
I think I actually have two trades of it. I think I have an extra one somewhere. That's
yeah,
how,
yeah.
like I accidentally bought a second one for some reason. I don't know why.
Well, it's a good piece of work. Mark and Steve McNiven did great work on that, and all the folks who were working on the assorted tie-ins did terrific, and it struck the right chord at the right time. It was very topical, it was very timely, it was very of the moment, but still sort of superhero-y, doing big, crazy, bombastic superhero stuff. And it got people talking, especially the people that were upset about it, which was a lot of them. Whether they were upset about the content or whether they were upset about the book running late. Either way,
Either
they
way.
there were people unhappy about both.
Yeah, yeah,
Some were unhappy about them both at the same time. I hate this book, and why is it late?
yeah. Yeah.
And those were always
What
the
are you worried
funniest
about if
ones.
it's late if you hate it, right?
Yeah, those were always the funniest ones.
Yeah.
But
Can you talk a little bit, Tom? Because as you have these story arcs that I think a lot of comic fans, because it's been a few years, look back and they remember the art. Can you talk about how the arcs come to life? Like it starts with maybe the creator. Are you in a room trying to map out like the next year and you start to build these art? Can you kind of walk how all that comes to life?
I mean, honestly, it happens a million different ways. Like there's no one way.
Yeah.
There's a general methodology, which is 2 or 3 times a year we do an editorial summit, which is a retreat where basically all of our editorial staff and a bunch of our big key writers and artists gather for 2 or 3 days to just kind of go over, here's all the stuff we have planned into the future, and to brainstorm and what else could we do, or how could whatever's going on in that book get bigger and impact on things on this book and so forth. And so a lot of these things to some degree came out of that process. Certainly, House of M kind of did, and Civil War did, and World War Hulk did, and was really changed by that process, and Secret Invasion did. Which isn't to say that individual people didn't have these ideas. Brian had the idea for Secret Invasion. It became the Secret Invasion it was, as we talked about it in the room, and went, this could be bigger than just an Avengers story. This could be a thing that goes across all of the books, and it should be, and we can do this and this and this and this, and and so forth and so on. But it's I really firmly believe that all the best comics come down to just the editor, the writer, the artist, and I've never been a fan of, we've put together a committee and we've got the best committee for coming up with a story, because I tend to fear, rightly or wrongly, that tends to push you towards the middle all the time, and you won't be truly daring or truly innovative, because there's always somebody in the room to say, I don't like that. That's bad. We shouldn't do that. I'm afraid of that. I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
That having been said, it's a system that's worked for us for the most part for a very long time, even as personnel has changed and creators have changed, editors have changed. So some version of that, as opposed to it's just me talking with whoever, Ryan North, about what's going to come up in Fantastic Four. And Ryan saying, well, I want to do this story, I want to do this story, I want to do this story. And me saying, that story sounds good, but this. That story sounds good, but maybe this. And rather than that story, we should probably do something around here that does some of this because we haven't had enough of this for a while or whatever. And him reacting to that and pushing back the other way and going, well, okay, yeah, I can do that first one. I don't want to do the second one that way because X, Y, and Z. I'd rather do this. And the third one, yeah, okay, I can do something like that. And it's exactly like this, except flipped upside down and turned around backwards and painted blue. So it's a free flowing sort of collaboration that sometimes involves a lot of people and sometimes involves few people. I tend to be more comfortable with few, but that's just me.
Yeah. Maybe a little less gridlock.
It's not as much gridlock. It's literally like we'll go into these retreats and you'll have 40, 50 people in the room.
Yeah.
And I don't care what the subject is. You're never going to get 50 people to agree to anything.
Yeah.
You can't get a lunch order out. So as people are arguing the merits or deficits of a particular storyline, quite often I've learned from experience over time, I have a tendency these days to hang back more. I used to fight a lot more in the room. I used to argue for whatever I thought in the room a lot, and try to push the ball in certain directions, which wouldn't always work out that way or whatever. And over the course of time, I realized, no, the smart move here is not to fight in the room. I'll just get through the conversation, get it out of the way, and then 2 days later, it'll just be back down to me and the editor-in-chief and the writers and whatnot. And it doesn't matter what writer number 7 thinks because they're not writing that story. They've got an opinion, and that's great, and they put it forward. And if they convinced us of something, because plenty of people have suggested things for stories that were not their own. You should do this, or what if this happened, or whatever. And that's great. That's what you want. It's just when somebody, when you say, whatever, I want to do a story where everybody's replaced by Skrulls, and the argument becomes, does it have to be Skrulls? What if it was, the Badoon instead? Or what if it was the Kree? Or what if it was and you can spend an hour and a half arguing back and forth over how this should be done or what should be done. But the plain practical matter is, once everybody goes home, most of those people are not going to make that story. And the people that are going to make that story are going to then make the best choice that they can. And chances are it's going to be Skrulls because that's what it was built on. It's all of that, but it's there's no one way that it happens. Sometimes stuff comes from the creators, sometimes the ideas come from us. But even when the ideas come from editorial, they don't end up on the page exactly like whatever was said. Everything goes through the Cuisinart of this relationship and this development process to come out the way it comes out.
Now, as a lot of these storylines are being adapted into film, how involved is your position in that, or is it involved at all?
Yeah, I watch the movies.
Yeah.
I watch the movies when they're done.
Okay.
None of that has anything directly to do. Although again, like we have regular meetings and conversations and visits. Either going out to the studios on the West Coast or those guys coming to New York. Where we talk about here's all the stuff that we communally have coming up, and here are all the touch points and things. And so, I know a whole bunch of things about here are the future plans that studios has for film and whatever. But and I can give an opinion on anything that I want. But again, it's an opinion of a guy that's not making that movie. So, I say whatever. And in the same way that I feel like, if I'm doing a comic, I'm going to walk out after the meeting is over and I'm going to make the comic I'm going to make. I don't expect anybody at studios to listen to whatever nonsense I have to say. Unless there's something in it that they find of value. If I say something and they're like, yeah, that's a good point, we should do something with that. Then they'll go, and nobody will ever know or care. But maybe the movie will be better or slightly a hair more to my liking. but that's a rarity. These are just conversations. These are talented people. They know the movie making business far better than I ever will. And in the same sort of way that, like, them telling me what my comic book stories would, should be, there's a certain skepticism of that's not really what you do. There's storytelling involved, but it's a different medium, it's a different idiom, different things work. They have to take everything that the raw material provides them, these stories that we've done in the past, all of them, and find the best bits and configure them in such a way that they work on film for a mainstream audience in 2 hours, and away you go. And they do that very, very well.
Absolutely, yeah. I would say that those movies were fairly successful. I don't know how many billions of dollars they produced, but I think they did all right. Yeah, I think they know what
Yes,
they're
yes.
doing.
They have a bit of an established track record at this point.
Exactly. Well, can we move over to X-Men, Tom? Is that okay, or is there anything else that you want to cover during that time frame of Avengers? Did we leave
Yeah,
anything?
no. We can segue over to X-Men. Although even there, like, there's only going to be so much I'm going to be able to say.
Understood.
Uh,
Understood. Absolutely.
given where we are and what the time is. Uh, and
Absolutely.
s- and some of that is we're not ready to reveal more, and some of that is really because I feel very strongly that the creative teams and the editorial teams that have been doing the X-Men books up to this point and for the last 4 or 5 years
Yeah.
should be permitted the spotlight to tell the conclusion of their story without everybody being more excited or distracted, even if they're not excited, distracted by whatever stuff is coming up.
Yeah.
So, I got to be very careful in these things because there might be things that I'd be happy to tell you, except that they maybe spoil something about, the Krakoa era. Everybody's, Rich Johnston got a whole story out of, hey, they killed Rachel Summers in this issue of Fall of X, but the same day there was a press release that went out that said that she was going to be in a new X book,
Yeah.
and that sort of stuff like that. That stinks.
Yeah.
I don't want to. I don't want to do that. I want to avoid that as much as possible. So, consequently, I'll talk to you in generalities, but getting a lot of specifics is probably too early.
Yeah, and I think that's fair, right? We want fans to be able to walk in and experience it for the first time as they're opening up the comic book, as opposed to someone saying something kind of spoiling. I don't like my comics to be spoiled either. I look
Yeah.
forward every Wednesday to grab it and to experience it on my own. And so a lot of times I won't read reviews until
Mhm.
after I've read the comic book, because that way I could form my own opinion and then see,
Right.
okay, maybe they were a little right with that storyline or whatever. But maybe we could kind of talk about some of the stuff that's already been released from the Marvel team. And we do know that there are 3 new titles. So that, I think, has been already established, right? And those will be kind of the first stage of kind of this next arc that will be part of X-Men in general. We know we just got X-Men 97 last week, which was a lot of fun. Maybe we could kind of start there and maybe talk from an
Mhm.
editorial standpoint as you're entering into X-Men. What are you looking for long term from an editor standpoint? I don't know if that's okay to ask.
Yeah, I mean, it's all okay to ask. It's more a question of what and how much I'm going to be able to answer. So let me start with one of the first things you said, which is a little bit off.
Okay, perfect.
We announced 3 books called X-Men, X-Men, Uncanny X-Men, and Exceptional X-Men, and they will debut in 3 successive months, one a month for 3 months. They will not be the only X books in those months,
Nice.
so they're not the first 3, but they are the 3 that are at the center. If you think of X-Men as a carousel, as a big thing that has lots of different spokes and things, the thing that's at the center is always going to be, X-Men, and then around that you have other titles that either have X in the title, your X Forces and X Factors and Excaliburs and X-Men's red, blue, black, and green. Um, or your character based titles, your Wolverines and Magnetos and Storms and Nightcrawlers and whatever's, but they all kind of rotate around the centerpiece, which is books with the word X-Men in them. And so going into this new era, we will have 3 of them, and those are the 3: X-Men by Jed MacKay and Ryan Stegman, Uncanny X-Men by Gail Simone and David Marquez, and Exceptional X-Men by Eve L. Ewing and Carmen Carniero. But in those months, every one of them, there'll be other X titles launching. There'll be a full line, a full spectrum of X books. And as I've said elsewhere, I want to try, and I don't know that we'll succeed at this, but we'll give it our best shot. I want to try to have an X title for every taste, every palette. I want to have a range of X books. I think from a storytelling standpoint, the Krakoa era has been very innovative and very ambitious. But as a reader, to me at least, I feel like there's not a sameness because the books aren't all the same, but there's a commonality of them all in that almost any X-Men book that you pick up at any given week in this era is about Krakoa to some degree or another. It's based around that concept, and to me, what that means is you have a range of books that are all not the same but are similar. The range is not as wide. I want to have a range of X-Men books that do different things, that have different tones and different flavors, that tell different stories, and that focus on different characters, and don't have literally all or most of the mutants in the world marching in the same direction, all agreeing on most of the big issues, if not the small issues, and working in lockstep. So as we come into the X-Men era of the day, Krakoa is no longer a going concern, and the X-Men and mutant kind at large is fractured. This central pillar that they've built their last couple of years around, building, maintaining, attempting to grow. So consequently, there is no hub, and now it comes down to all of these individual characters and players having to figure out what do you do? What's your next step? Where do you go? How do you live? How do you function? How do you exist? What does being a mutant mean anymore? What does Krakoa mean anymore? What does any of this stuff mean? And how are you going to get by? And where are you going to live? And what's your outlook on this stuff going to be? And to me, I find that more interesting. And again, there's nothing to say that their way was wrong and my way is right. It's just different. It's just a choice. But particularly after a bunch of years where it feels like every X character, all the guys that back in the trading card days we would have classified as superheroes, and all the guys that we would have classified as supervillains, all existing together and pulling in the same direction. I'd like to get back to a world where they could be pulling in different directions, and we can have all kinds of shades of gray and differences of opinion between characters, because when they bang up against one another, that's when interesting things happen.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I fully agree. That sounds pretty amazing.
I also want to get, and again, I'm talking in generalities here, or trying to.
Yeah.
I also want to get the X-Men and the X characters as a whole back out into the world and interacting with regular people. Because again, just by virtue of the setup for Krakoa, there are issues of X-Men or X books, not even necessarily X-Men, X books, where there isn't anybody who's not a mutant or a robot from the future or a space alien or whatever in them. And I feel like one of the things that made that underlying mutant metaphor work so well and made X-Men connect with people and be so popular is the fact that the characters interacted with the people around them, whether that was, I don't know, Stevie Hunter or Tom Corsi or whomever, that gave you the ability to see these characters and their situations and their struggles and their situations from a regular human point of view. And so I want to have a lot more interaction between the mutant characters, hero and villain, and the rest of the world in cases that are not purely antagonistic. Yeah. Like literally these days, more or less, the times you tend to see, quote unquote regular humans show up are when they're trying to kill the X-Men. And they can still do that. They'll probably do a bunch of it. Yeah. But that's not the only thing. Yeah. So that's a thing. That's a thing too. Um, I don't know if that's answered your question entirely, but if you have other things you want to follow up on, by all
Yeah,
means.
no, I think it did, Tom, and I fully understand, right? We're at the very beginning stages, and we certainly want to ensure. I mean, you're going to, no matter what I want, anyways, right? But you have to protect all the things that you're building that we will see later on. That way we have that experience that you want the fan to gain. So I fully understand that, and not looking to try and pry something out of you, but as we look at X-Men, just from a more corporate standpoint, right? We had this long Marvel run from a cinema standpoint that really just took, I think, superhero movies to another level
Mhm.
completely. Like it
Sure.
redefined what a superhero movie looks like, right? And with all the separation between Marvel, with Fox owning, X-Men and these other things, and now it all being kind of brought under one tent. And I'm just speaking on myself, so this is not something from Disney or anything, but I feel as a fan, it might be good for a lot of the Avengers and some of those characters to rest a little bit
Hmm.
because they're so well known. And now you have the X-Men, which X-Men fans have been dying for something new to come out. You know what I mean? So my sense is Disney wants to focus a little bit more on the X-Men to maybe let this other portion of what made the Disney movies so great from a Marvel perspective, maybe give it a rest a little bit, maybe down the road revisit that, and it'll be fresh for a lot of fans. But man, we have this whole other IP that just you could go in so many different directions. I don't know if that's kind of the thought process, or am I close, or am I just making stuff up as a fan like we all do?
Um, well, again, I think to some degree you're making the stuff up.
Yeah, okay,
Fans
very
do.
good.
Certainly, and I can't speak at all for studios or for anything other than Marvel Publishing.
Right.
But certainly, people are excited that X-Men is a property that can now be used in film and television, and certainly, everybody seems to be super excited by X-Men 97, which is great. It's a great show. I've seen more of it than you have at this point, and it bugs the crap out of me every once in a while because they end up, they'll do something in an episode, and I'll go, I was going to do that. I was going to do that in 6 months, and you bastards beat me to it. I'm still going to do it, but now they're going to go, oh yeah, like it was like that thing in X-Men 97. Um, so yeah, that show is top notch and deserves all the accolades that it's been getting. I think it's great,
Yeah.
and I
So
think it
far,
really
I've loved it.
it really captures the essence of X-Men as a thing, and really reminds people, oh, here's why I liked all these characters and I liked all this stuff in the first place. And on that level, there's a little of that certainly that goes into guiding what we're doing, coming forward. That having been said, like when we built our X books, our new X books, none of the creators, and myself included, had none of us had seen any X-Men 97. So we made a bunch of choices, and some of those choices are similar, and some of those choices are different, and they're going to shake out. But certainly the fact that that show has made people super excited about X-Men again for the first time in a couple of years is really good for me.
Oh, I think so.
Since I'm going to have some new X-Men books coming out in not too long, and so that's great. I tip my hat to them. They've fulfilled the most important purpose, which is that they help me, Tom Brevoort.
Yeah. Now, what kind of pressure do you feel coming from the Avengers and everything you were doing over there now to the X-Men, with all the show coming out and everybody getting a little wild? Do you feel pressure like that? Or, I mean, after 35 years, maybe it's just, I'm on another title and I'm just going to do what I've always done type thing.
I mean, again, it's a little from column A, a little from column B.
Yeah,
Honestly, I don't feel pressure, but it's sort of the opposite. Any pressure I feel, I think, is internally based. You know, uh, uh, being given X-Men to work with is like being given the keys to a Maserati.
for sure.
It can go really fast if you drive it well, but it sure tends to explode if you don't, and you run it into something. So the goal is figure out how to drive it fast. And I've been doing this. I've done every yeah, every character in Marvel I've done some work with, including X-Men over the years, but I've never run X-Men, and I've never steeped myself in that world as deeply, certainly as the Marvel Heroes, Avengers area and so forth, or even Spider-Man that I oversaw and was on the periphery of, during the 3 times a month period when Steve Wacker was editing it. Um, so it's different, and there are certainly days when I go, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Boy, I hope this stuff works. It sure seems good, but I don't know. And then there are other days when it's just like, yeah, this is I understand how this works. I understand how to make these comics, and what I think people respond to in these characters. Yeah, let's do that. We'll do that. That's good.
Yeah.
So it's like anything that's new. It's kind of outside of the comfort zone. It's not anything that I asked for or was campaigning for. This was the opposite of Fantastic Four. This wasn't me saying, "Oh, you got to give me X-Men." If anything, it was more like, "Oh, you really shouldn't give me X-Men." That's not my world.
Yeah.
But it is my world now, and I'm gonna figure out how to make it work,
Yeah.
and how to connect and do. What we do is not going to be the X-Men of the 90s, and it's not going to be the X-Men of the 2000s, or the X-Men of the 80s or 70s or anything. It's going to be a new X-Men of today, of 2024, that's going to hopefully draw inspiration in the best parts, character-wise, storyline-wise, inspiration-wise, from all of those eras.
Mhm.
But it's not, I don't view it as going backwards. I view it as going forward. And I know a lot of X fans tend to be worried and tend to be reactionary. Oh, Krakoa is going away, and that means we're going to go back to doing the same 3 X-Men stories that we always do. And the answer there is, well, we might touch on some of the parts of some of those 3 stories that worked, but we're not just going to do 1991 X-Men comics by any means.
Yeah.
We'll probably have a little more of that flavor, if only because we're going to be a different place than the current Krakoa books are. But hopefully we're going to do X-Men comics that remind everybody of why they love these characters and why they mean so much to them and they followed them for so long, and make them exciting again and make them a can't miss thing. I've sort of said from the jump, the goal here is very simple. X-Men must outsell Spider-Man regularly, and really X-Men must outsell Batman. But I don't, Chip is writing that, so I got that in the bag. Um, so,
Shots fired, Tom. Shots
but
fired.
it's you got to talk true.
I gotta love it.
You know, but it's X-Men. That's kind of where, for whatever, the last 30 or 40 years, up until maybe the last 10 years or so, that's where it's sort of always existed and sat, and kind of where I think it wants to sit if you do it well, because all the stuff that appeals about it, all the stuff that made all of those characters iconic and cool, and your favorites in comics and the characters you felt the most for, that's all still there. It just needs to be presented in a certain fashion, and polished up and showcased in that way. And I don't know that I know how to do it, but hopefully the people that I've hired to do these books will, and then I can just look really smart standing behind them and go and look at these cool X-Men books. And we've got books coming out that I genuinely like. I stand behind all of them. I think this will be a super good line, and that again, no matter what sort of flavor of X-Men you're looking for, in your Baskin Robbins of a comic shop, there'll be some title somewhere, hopefully, that will give you that. Not every title. It won't be tutti frutti in all books. Some of them will be tutti frutti, and some of them will be Rocky Road, and some of them will be chocolate.
Yeah.
But there'll be a span, hopefully, and we'll see what works and what doesn't, and the stuff that doesn't will go away, and the stuff that works we'll do more of and expand out, just like we did on Avengers, and just like we would on anything else.
Right. Yeah.
So it's fun. It's a challenge. This is the weirdest period for me right now, because I'm in the valley, which is to say we've more or less finished almost all of our Avengers material.
Hmm.
Like I'm not quite the last issue of Avengers Twilight hasn't gone to press yet, and one or two other things, but we're almost there. But the first X-Men books don't start leaving house for another month or two.
Yeah.
And so we're sort of in this weird lull period where every week I'm used to sending 4, 5, or 6 books to press, and we're sending one maybe.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, this feels very disquieting. Like there's nothing going on, even though everything is going on.
Yeah.
But that'll all change soon. People will get their first little taste in Free Comic Book Day
Yeah.
on May 4th, and they'll get their second taste in Uncanny X-Men 700, the last issue of Jordan White and the Krakoa Era's run, because my guys are going to do a 10-page epilogue sequence. So we're going to go directly from the last Krakoa pages right into, and here's the new world
Oh, wow.
in the course of that issue, and then from there it'll spread out into here's all the new books, and it'll be a whole new thing, and people can then lionize Jordan as a genius after spending 5 years decrying him as an idiot, and they can anoint me the idiot now, at least until I'm gone, and then I'll be remembered well.
That's pretty exciting. So you think probably, sometime near the end of April, early May, a lot of these other titles will be kind of released as far as the names of them, or are we looking like the end of May?
I mean, again, not to get too deeply into it, we showed an image at the South by Southwest panel that included a bunch of logos for a bunch of the other titles. It's not quite all of them, but it's a bunch of them. And more details on those are going to come out, not all at once and not all of them at the same time. But one of the things we have to do, like it or not, in comics is solicit things.
Yeah.
And so when it's time to solicit the months in which those books are coming out, and probably a little before them because we'll want to announce it ahead of time. So there'll be, whatever press release will go out, or interviews or things, and you'll see some preview art and such. That's only going to get start to happen more and more. Like the closer we get to the end of Krakoa, the more this stuff is going to start coming out. So I'd expect over the next couple of weeks to start seeing, more stuff drop beyond the 3 books that we started with.
Wow. Well, that's very exciting. I mean, obviously being on this side with a bunch of other fans constantly talking about it, you got everybody come up with all kinds of theories of what's going to happen. And, it's, again, I guess there's some negative to that. I guess on the positive side, people are talking about it and people are really excited about it. So I
Sure.
guess it's a good place to be in, but
This
yeah.
is no different. One of the things that Brian and I observed back in the day when we were doing a lot of the big events, House of M and Secret Invasion and Siege and so forth, was that there's a consistent pattern. And that pattern is while the series is coming out, everybody hates it. They just don't like it. They're afraid of it. They don't know where it's going. They don't know how it's going to end. Is this going to be all right? They're nervous. They're worried. And after the series is over, they kind of look back and go, "Oh, I kind of like that roller coaster ride I was on. That was great," because they know they get to the end of the ride safely. So like clockwork, Secret Invasion would come out, and all during that, like the sky would be falling, and then whatever 6 months later, it would start to show up on Marvel Unlimited, and it would be like, "This is the greatest thing ever. This is so good." And it's the difference between people feeling a surety that it's going to be okay, and feeling that trepidation that it's not. Same kind of thing that you would see with, say, Superior Spider-Man, which everybody hated until it was over, and then where they were like, "This was the best thing ever" for 3 years, because all during that time they were just worried, "Am I never going to see Peter Parker again?" And that's kind of a crazy thing to be worried about, but it speaks to the power of the storytelling that you buy into it enough or you're worried about it. Or if you do see Peter Parker again, maybe he's going to be completely different and have 2 heads or something. Like, I'm unsettled. So this period is just that. It's X-Men fans who are enormously invested in these characters and their world, being comfortable at least, if not enthusiastic, about the current Krakoa status quo, and being trepidatious about what is next. And particularly in the absence of information, they all do the same thing that we all do, which is they come up with the worst case scenario and assume that that must be what's going to happen. And maybe it is, we're going to try not to, but maybe we're just not that good at this. And these will all be stinky X-Men books that people can't wait to get rid of. But I hope not, and we're working real hard to not make them that. People will be, I think, more accommodating and like them more when they can experience them. It's tough to talk about this stuff in the abstract. Nobody has any story, and people can take any quote I say about anything and find the spin on it that makes them afraid or angry, and then rail against it. So I try to let that stuff just go. I don't care. It's fine. This is part of the process. It's just what it is. Just means you're interested. That's great. Have your credit card ready, because the month will come and you'll want to buy these. Until then, there's nothing to be said.
Yeah. Wow, Tom. I mean, thank you so much for sharing all of that. I know a lot of people are very excited. I'll be one of those ones with my credit card ready to start picking up these new titles. Stay very open-minded as we get into them. And I have no doubt, especially with your track record, that I think X-Men is going to be in a good place. So I appreciate that. And thank you so much. I mean, that is what a career you've had. What, 35 years now? Is it 35 this year?
This is my 35th.
Wow. 35 years, longest running employee at Marvel right now. 35 years, walking encyclopedia, at least for the first 20 or so years of your career, right? As we start to get to some of these later stories, but pretty impressive, Tom. I have one last question that's not related, if that's okay.
Sure.
As I was wanting to ask from your perspective, from when you started to today, and with the expansion of indie comics, because indie comics has always been there, at least as a reader for me. As the indie comics gets bigger and bigger, and you're starting to see a lot of writers kind of move off and start their own kind of a thing, do you find it harder to keep a writer on a title long term, more so today than before, or has this always happened? It's just maybe I'm noticing it more.
I think it depends on what you mean by long term.
It's a good point.
Certainly people these days don't tend to do Chris Claremont-sized X-Men runs,
Exactly.
16 years.
Yeah.
That doesn't tend to happen. On the other hand, as I said a couple of minutes ago, Brian Bendis wrote Avengers for 8.
8 years, yeah.
There have been people that have been on things for a good long while. John Hickman has been on books. I mean, Krakoa has been going on for about 5 years. So, and that wasn't all John, but it started with John and then was passed to Kieran and Al and Jerry and those guys. So the idea that there's constant turnover, isn't entirely accurate. But there's always been a push and pull.
Yeah.
People want to go off. They want to do other things. They want to create things that they have an ownership stake in. And they like playing with the characters in the Marvel universe too. So you can do all of that. But there's always a natural churn that comes to this. The guys that you'd look at today and think these are the top writers and artists in the industry right now is a different bunch of people than it was 10 years ago, and that group is a different bunch of people than it was 10 years before that. The problem comes when you want it to be the same group of 10 people. And, the reality is, just like in the entertainment world anywhere else, certainly, if you're Tom Cruise, you can always sell a movie, but you're not always going to be the guy who's out there in the front of the world and on top, unless you've put out a movie that year. But, so there's always an ebb and flow to this. So I don't feel like it's a problem or that it's any harder. I think that the marketplace maybe makes it harder to have longer runs because the number of books and the expense involved in collecting them means fans can't support as much stuff, and that means your title attrition goes a little faster, and the need to find a way to go, we need to reset this, we need a new beginning, is worthwhile. It just happens more frequently maybe than it did 10 years ago or 20 years ago. That's just a natural outgrowth of the reality of that situation. I mean, that having been said, Jed McKay's done what, 33 issues of Moon Knight at this point
Yeah.
under two
Yeah.
titles. So that's not an insignificant run.
Yeah.
And how long was Chip on Daredevil?
Yeah.
A couple of years, and so forth. So not everybody is going to do that, but assuming it works out, hopefully Saladin will write Daredevil for a couple of years, and then somebody else will. And before Chip, it was whoever it was before Chip. I don't remember if that was Charles or if that was, forgetting now who was doing Daredevil before Chip. Boy, that's stupid of me. It probably was Charles, and I'm just trying to remember somebody that didn't exist in between them. But Charles did it for a bunch of years.
Yeah.
So that's, that's the thing of it. How many issues of Amazing Spider-Man has Zeb Wells written at this point? A lot.
Oh,
So yeah. So I mean, when your favorite creator, leaves and goes off and does something else, like that's always traumatic for you, or it's always a change because you may like whatever the new thing is and so forth. But like, I really loved them when they were doing the Hulk or whatever. But that's, that happens. That happens, constantly, and has always happened.
Yeah. Yeah. After 35 years, Tom, and obviously this is very exciting with you going to another title, but how do you keep things fresh in your job outside of each of the titles? Because 35 years, I mean, I've been, I'm almost 50 and I've been in the same industry for 30 years. And so I find myself trying to either reinvent a little bit of myself or trying to keep things fresh because I'm doing the kind of the same type of thing day after day. What does Tom do to keep things fresh in your career?
Um, I don't know that it's ever really been a problem, honestly,
Hmm.
because I like the work.
Yeah.
I like the gig. I'm invested in the universe and the characters. I've put a lot of work into it.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's not like there's ever a point where I'm like, oh, this again. I got to do another issue of Fantastic Four. Oh my God, poor me. Oh, I wish I was doing anything else.
Yeah.
It's never that. I mean, it's a job, which means there are problems and there are hassles, and you get angry at a situation, or you have a problem with somebody, or with a policy, or with a whatever. Just like any job, but more often than not, we in comics do it because we love it. We love the medium, we love the characters, we love the industry, as flawed as it is. We enjoy that, and so that's always been the case, and I've never had any particular impulse to not be doing this. So I don't know, I keep it fresh by coming up with new things to do.
Yeah.
Inventing new stories, inventing new titles, inventing new concepts, finding ways to spin things differently. Even if you've done the same book the same way, for a long time. That Avengers run is one 26-year run, but it's really about a dozen different, smaller runs with different writers and different artists and different, takes and directions and objectives, and even cast, members over the course of that time. It's not all the same, so it's not all the same thing. And as long as you can keep being excited by whatever the next thing is, that's all you need.
Yeah. Well, Tom, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you spending a Sunday afternoon with me for a little bit. What an amazing career. Really excited about this next stage of your experience. Cannot wait to get my hands on these titles. But just thank you. I really appreciate you trusting me, talking about your career. And man, I hope we could do this again down the road sometime when X-Men is exploding in all kinds of different ways, and we can kind of talk about more into detail of
Yep.
how you and the rest of the team on there kind of arrived to some of these things. Because I know right now we got to keep kind of our lips
Yep.
tight as you go into it at the very beginning. But thank you so much, Tom. I really appreciate it.
Sure. Happy to do it. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish you an amazing Sunday and a great week coming up.
Yep, you too.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it, Tom.